Hello, and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
That was a bit of a delay, Dave. We're having a bit of a slow
Oh,
day.
no, I pressed it immediately.
Okay. Maybe there's a delay for it coming through to you for some reason.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's immediate now then. I don't know
Okay.
what happened then.
Yeah, very strange. I suppose we've been having a few issues recently. I don't know
Been one of
why.
those, yeah, been like that kind of few days, hasn't it?
Yeah. And what's more, obviously, we're streaming on a day that we don't normally stream on as well. We're doing a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday or a Thursday. That probably throws things off for us anyway. Creatures
Yeah.
of habit and all that. But yeah. So tonight's stream, we're going to be discussing beauty. So we were a bit late getting the invite for the stream out this week. So it wasn't until yesterday after the stream that we discussed what we were going to do, and we're talking about beauty. So the question of tonight is: can beauty be objective? So we got actually a couple responses from people in a couple of areas, but I want to just highlight one right now. Someone said, no. And I said, what makes you think that? Because that's what I think. Because that's my answer. Right? But what led you to that answer? Silence. So that tends to be the level of thinking that I often see with people on the internet. We like when we're talking about things like atheism and things like that. Well, that's what I think, because that's what I think. I just don't accept that. I don't agree with that. Okay, well, why don't you agree with that? Why don't you accept that? What's
I,
led
I,
you to the conclusion?
yeah, I don't believe it. It's you making the claim, so I don't have to give any reason.
Which is a common misunderstanding. To hold a justified position, you have to be able to rationally explain your position, basically. Now, there may be times when you have a rational position and someone will give you some evidence that then shows that your position is incorrect, at which point you have two choices. You can maintain that position and have an irrational position, or you can change your position to the one that is now considered rational because you've been presented a good argument or evidence or whatever to support another place. Anyway, without getting too much into that, we're going to discuss whether beauty can be objective. So the first thing we need to think about, and I'm sure many of you know this, is what we mean by subjective and objective. We could even throw a bit of relativism in there, but for the sake of the argument, no.
Yeah.
So subjective means it's your personal opinion, your personal preference, etc. So beauty is in the eye of beholder. I find this beautiful. That would be something subjective. I happen to think this music is beautiful, this woman is beautiful, this man is beautiful, this painting is beautiful. That's me talking about my preference, a subjective preference. When we mean objective, we're talking about something that is above our personal opinion. Regardless of what we think, this is considered beautiful. So how do we get to that? Dave?
Yeah, leave me the hard part.
I know the answer to this one, but you explain it better than I do.
Well, when it comes to, say, art and that kind of thing, when we say that something can be objectively beautiful, what we generally tend to mean is something like there's standards of judgment that are outside of the personal opinion. So you can judge. Can you judge a painting wrong? Can you judge a piece of art wrong? Standard, something like that.
So what he means there is, within art, there are different standards. So consider abstract art and still life. There is a standard for what abstract art is. You might not like it, but you could objectively say, yes, this ticks all the boxes of what is considered a good piece of abstract art. Same with still life. You obviously know what that means. Now, if you submit a piece of still life art as an abstract piece, doesn't matter how good it is not good as an abstract piece of art. So you would say that is not a beautiful piece of abstract art, even though it is actually a beautiful painting or picture or whatever. So that's where we have an objective standard of art. There are standards that are there that we can basically tick box. The same can be said for genres of music as well, can't it, Dave?
Yeah, pretty much. That it's basically Kendall Walton's argument. I can't remember the year now. Hang on, I'll just have a look.
That's all right. So I'll just fill in the music bit while he's having a quick look. So when we're talking about music, you have various genres. So you consider something like metal, which is generally really heavy on the guitars and distortion and all that sort of thing. Some person might think it's absolute noise, but they should be able to still judge it as a good piece of metal. Now, there could be some amazing guitar player doing really accurate strumming and things like that, and finger picking and all that. And you could think, wow, he's got amazing skill. But you could still go, but the end product's a bit shit. Your preference there is coming in. It might tick the boxes of, yep, that's definitely a piece of metal that's done all that, but I just don't really like that particular piece. You might like other bits of metal. You might like something where actually it's played awfully, but the vibe you get from it is, oh yeah, that's what I'm connected to here. Again, you could get different genres of music. If you were to submit a drum and bass track or a piece of trance as metal, that's shit metal. It could be an amazing bit of drum and bass or trance, but for metal, no. Unless, of course, it's a fusion track, but that's overcomplicating the matter.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I had a feeling it was 1970, but you know me, Mr. Self-Doubt all the time. So I double-checked, and yeah, Kendall Walton's argument is 1970. It's from 1970, and it's the categories of art is the paper. And what he basically argues is that we, like you were just explaining, we can have various categories of art and music and that kind of thing. And we can judge them based on those categories. So if I was to present you a piece of abstract art and you were to say, well, that's awful, it looks nothing like a real tree, you have judged that work incorrectly.
Mm.
You might not find it beautiful, but that's because you're judging it in the wrong way. So what Walton argues is that in order to truly appreciate the beauty of some piece of art, like music or film, you have to have at least some kind of training and some kind of eye to be able to distinguish the kinds of things that make it beautiful. So there could be subjective beauty. So, I mean, we should probably define what we mean by beauty, but there could be subjective beauty in that the individual finds the painting beautiful or finds it awful. But due to these categories of art, you could argue that he actually doesn't know what he's talking about when he's judging that piece because he isn't invested enough or educated enough to appreciate the beauty of some piece of art.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned film there as well. So another quick example that we could go with that is you look at a horror movie. Now, this is where I think we need to necessarily define beauty, which we will come back to. But obviously there are set parameters for what makes a good horror film. And, if you judged it based on, well, it didn't make me laugh, it's not a comedy. It's not supposed to make you laugh. Again, unless it's a piece of fusion again, but that's not the way we're going with this. So
sorry, my internet just cut off.
That's okay. I was just saying about horror, and if you judge it saying, well, it didn't make me laugh, well, it's a piece of horror. It's not necessarily supposed to make you laugh.
Exactly. And You can have people that go into something like one of the Conjuring films, go, oh my God, that made me jump 10 times. What a brilliant horror film. But somebody who truly appreciates horror might go and go, well, just because it made you jump doesn't mean it's a good horror film. I can make you jump.
Yeah.
I can throw a firework on the ground and make you jump. Yep. You know, it's not that difficult. A good horror is something with atmosphere and has a foreboding sense of danger or
there's a good
story
something
like that.
And all of that in it as well. I think some of the best bits of horror has a good concept, should I say, not necessarily a good story, because there are terrible horror films that I actually really enjoy.
Same.
But yeah,
Psycho Gorman, terrible story, terrible acting, really, but incredible horror film, an incredible bit of nostalgia film.
I still need to watch that one. I haven't got around to watching it yet.
Get Out.
Dude, I'm busy. I don't have time for films.
Neither do I.
But yeah, so let's retrace our steps a little bit, because we've given you an example, or a few examples, of objective standards that things can be judged against, and what we subjectively think is beautiful or not. And sometimes these can be in conflict with each other. Something can be objectively beautiful but subjectively horrid, right? That's comparing the standard to your preference, and that's fine. So the first question we really do need to actually cover, and I apologize for skipping over it at the beginning, is what do we mean by beauty?
Okay. Now, there's people that have this idea that beauty is a property of something. So if something's beautiful, it contains this higher order property that it's beautiful, something that makes it beautiful, like symmetry or something like that. But a lot of people who do aesthetics generally tend to label beauty as a feeling of the sublime. So it's not something within the object that we're looking at contains properties that give us a certain feeling of awe and, just a sublime feeling that makes us think, oh my God, that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what beauty is. It's that connection between you and the object that makes you feel a particular way.
Then that sounds like we're doing that again on a subjective standard there. So how would we have an objective standard of these things that we are comparing to, and we've discussed how you can have this standard there? How would we get to one of those if we're just talking about how it makes us feel?
Because you could train your eye to pick out these properties. Sorry, I did miss quite a bit of that, but I think I've got what you meant. I might have to quit out of Discord and come back in, but I'll see if I can power through.
That's right.
Warrior and all that. Yeah. So you can learn to judge a film based on its cinematography if you learn what good cinematography is. So when you learn what good cinematography is, you will start to get that feeling of sublime. If you don't like abstract art, but then you start to learn what makes good abstract art and why it's good and what makes it beautiful, you can then learn to feel that from those pieces of art.
Yeah, or even if you don't feel that, you can still judge it as, yes, this would make someone who likes abstract art tick those boxes. It ticks all the boxes that would make them feel that way, even though it doesn't make me feel that way.
Exactly. And you could say the artist who created this is a good artist. It's not just somebody who's made a piece of abstract art. It's somebody who's created a good piece of abstract art. It can be objectively judged in that manner.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So saying beauty is in the eye of the beholder is kind of correct, because it's the feeling that the subject has. But that's not to say that they can misjudge something, that they can't misjudge something because of these categories of art.
So where we've got these objective standards, we actually had a question from Chris on this one, which I gave a brief overview, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this before I give mine. The objective standards that we have, how did we go from our subjective preference to actually having these objective standards?
Sorry, dog hair in the mouth all of a sudden. He sleeps on the bed, so they float up. Okay, what it is basically art critics and artists themselves have over time come to the conclusion of what makes something good. And sometimes, like in the case of, say, the Impressionists or the Realists, they'll come along and people go, well, that's awful. And it'll be judged as awful until it starts to take hold and until people start to enjoy it. And then they start to learn what are good standards.
Yeah. So we lost you there again, Dave. So if we were to, I don't know if you can still hear me, and it's just your video that's frozen, or if you're there at all. But if we were to think about it this way, with the you're talking about, for example, the critics all talking about what they think is good. So this is almost like basically popularism. They make an intersubjective agreement of what they think suits this particular thing. So if it happens to be, again, we'll go with abstract art. You know, they've sat down and they've gone and they've basically discussed this thing, and they've sat down and they've agreed what makes a good piece of abstract art, and that becomes our standard. And we could say that the same with any other piece of art or any other piece of music. Hopefully Dave will be back shortly. There he is.
I'm sorry.
That's
My
all right,
internet
Dave.
keeps cutting off. I don't know why.
I don't know.
And it's literally the connection rather than just, the Discord bit. It's actually dropping from the router for some reason.
Is it your Wi-Fi?
Looks like it might be.
Okay. We'll have a chat about power line adapters after this. So I was just filling in for you whilst you were there, saying that they essentially make an intersubjective agreement on a particular standard, which then becomes an objective standard. Actually, when I was talking about my article, does morality have a purpose? One of the things I described there was how something starts off as completely subjective and like a hammer. So the first person who built a hammer, did it because they thought it would work. It was their own intuition, their opinion, blah de blah, and they did, yeah. And then it sort of went through this process of being, intersubjectively agreed that yes, this is definitely the best way to get nails into wood. Yeah, brilliant. And then it became an objective standard of, yes, if you want to bang nails into wood, you use a hammer. Now, there are different types of hammer for different nails and situations, and that's overcomplicating the matter. We're just talking really basically hammer and nail. Now, equally, someone could add a subjective purpose to the hammer and use it to cave in someone's skull.
You've been watching the Yorkshire Ripper, haven't you?
No, I haven't. But, someone could use that. But you've got your split between your objective standard of the purpose of the hammer to bang in nails and your subjective purpose of caving someone's skull in. In the same way that you have your art where you've got your subjective preference and the objective standard, which has gone through a process of being intersubjectively agreed upon and then make a standard for different types. And that's why there's so many different categories you'll find, be it music or art or film or anything like that, because sometimes someone comes up, and you were getting onto this with your surrealist sort of thing, comes up with a thing that everybody's like, nah, but then more and more people go, oh, actually, maybe. And because it starts building up traction, there becomes an intersubjective agreement about, yeah, we like this sort of thing, screw everyone else, and it becomes its own entity, and then it gets raised to an objective standard as well. So with all of these things, yeah, they did start off subjectively, but then it produced an objective standard. So, Dave, oh no, I think you've frozen again. What's going on, man? Should turn the turntables on and have a mix whilst we wait for him to get back, shall we? Uh, so I think that we've obviously described what beauty is at this point. It's basically the reaction to the qualities make you feel the certain way, and how it can become an objective standard, and you can still subjectively disagree with it. But if it was a good piece of metal and you were to say that that is bad metal, you'd technically be wrong. You could say, I don't like metal, therefore I don't like this music. And that's fine, because on the subjective side, you would be right. But on the objective side, saying a good piece of metal is bad just because you don't like metal, it doesn't make sense. You're not actually comparing it to the genre. Just like sometimes people will do a similar thing where just because they don't understand the logic or a particular definition, they'll say it's wrong or illogical. And it's like, okay, well, if you don't understand basic propositional logic, because this is how it works, and you're saying it's wrong because you don't like it or whatever, you're not really doing your duty. With logic, there are certain rules. With different categories of art, there are different standards. And we can go round and round discussing all of these. I think Dave's on his way back in now.
Hello, sorry about that. I rebooted the machine just to see if that helps.
Let's hope so. If not, maybe we'll have to put a pin in it.
We should be able to be okay. I mean, sometimes it happens with this machine for some reason. The dog banged into it, and it just, every now and again, it has this little fit with the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, fair. Well, let's hope it is on the machine, then restarts, sorted it out. I was just covering off what we did again, our description of beauty, and how someone can have a subjective preference, which would never be wrong. But if they were to say that they disagree with, say there's a good piece of metal, for example, and they say it's bad because they don't like metal, but they're judging it as a piece of metal, I said that they would be wrong with that. They can say, I don't like metal, so I don't like this kind of music, so I don't think it's beautiful, which would be perfectly fine because they are subjectively correct in that, because it is just down to personal preference. But if you were to say it's a bad piece of metal because you don't like metal, then that's ridiculous, because you're not comparing it to that standard.
You're not judging it by the product, you're judging it simply by how it makes you feel.
Exactly.
And yeah, and if beauty is just a subjective feeling and you've never learned to appreciate that type of music, okay, you don't find it beautiful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not compared to the standards of how that bit of composition is put together.
Yeah. So there was another one that you wanted to broach tonight, though, which was about beauty in nature.
Yeah, hang on one second. I just need to load something up.
Okie dokie. So what do you think? Do you think nature is beautiful? Do you think certain aspects of nature are not beautiful? How do you compare what is beautiful in nature? Let us know.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting question. Okay, so with art, we have these categories that we can judge by. We can say, well, it's not cubist and you're judging it as a cubist work. But with nature, is there anything like that that you can judge it by? Is there categories that you can put things into to say?
Well, not really. I suppose you could say maybe a beach, a nice sandy beach. If you compare a beach covered in rocks and crap versus a beautiful white sand and ocean, I mean, that tends to be, it's not necessarily a standard in the same way. Again, if the countryside, if you were talking about the countryside and it was, an urban built up area with loads of pollution, you'd say, well, as the countryside, that's not good. So there are sort of descriptions for what you're expecting. If you say a mountain and it's a foot high, it's not a mountain. By definition, it's not a mountain.
That's it. there are things that we can label these things as, but then what makes a good mountain beyond how it makes you feel looking at it?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we've got the definition of a mountain, which is a certain height that I can't remember because I haven't been in school for many years. Um,
Same.
yeah, but there is a standard of what makes a mountain a mountain. But how could we say a mountain is a good mountain or a beautiful mountain? For me, again, this comes down to a level of subjectivity. If it was gloomy and filled with pollution and there was mess everywhere, I would say I don't find that particular scene beautiful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the actual mountain itself is not beautiful. It's just the crap that it's covered with.
Yeah.
So that one's actually quite difficult.
Well, I can't remember his
He's
name.
going to show me it's not that difficult at all now, isn't he?
Oh, no, it is. Alan Carlson makes an argument that sort of branches off Kendall Walton's. What that is that while we have these categories of art, we also have categories of nature as set out by science. So a mountain is such and such. If you look at a mountain and say, well, it's a terrible hill, it's not a very pretty hill, it's too tall, well, then you're not judging that mountain in the right way because it's not a hill, it's a mountain. Or this still water isn't beautiful because beautiful water is stormy and rushy. There, the categories kind of fall down.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, in the same way that we were talking, an ocean. If you're comparing a stream to an ocean, no, that's not what it does. That's not what we're talking about. But then we could say there are certain things about an ocean that do make it better. Again, we go back through the pollution one. If it's nice, clear, crisp water and you can see all the things underneath it, we would say that it is more beautiful. But then that comes down to a subjective preference that I suppose is somewhat agreed on by most people, so maybe it's a bit intersubjective, but I don't know if it's quite up to an objective standard like we would be judging art. Opie's just popped in. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Opie.
He says Japanese aesthetics is like his side hobby study. Japanese aesthetics.
Oh, nice.
Interesting.
I've never actually studied them. I love Japanese artwork and that kind of thing, but I don't know much about it, to be honest.
No, so you're going to have to come on and fill us in with that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, nice to see you. So we've got those scientific classifications, and we can say if it fits those things. So, but that's almost an objective standard of what a mountain is, and that doesn't really tell us whether it's beautiful as a mountain.
Yeah. It doesn't give us a standard that we can actually judge it by, just how we can judge it. So if you imagine something like the Grand Canyon, now we know that was created by millions of years of streams cutting through it, all that kind of stuff. We can say, well, that's what makes it beautiful. It's, it's what nature has done to create that scenery that makes it beautiful. But again, is that truly beautiful? Does that necessarily make something beautiful? It's scientific, and there are people who appreciate nature in such a way that they might find that beautiful. But if they were to turn around to someone who says, well, I don't find it beautiful, and they say, well, you're just judging it wrong, are they judging it wrong?
And there isn't as much of a standard again. I like what you're saying about the process being a nice scientific process. It's a natural process. But then that got me thinking, well, not every natural process is, well, at least subjectively beautiful. I mean, you've seen some animals and humans give horrific births, for example, but that's perfectly natural. A snake bite,
is a bug laying eggs in a child's eyes, which then burst and pop out? Is that beautiful?
I would say no. I mean, it's doing what it does. It's natural, but does natural equate to beauty? Then we go, well, there is natural beauty when we're looking at a scene. So obviously, we're saying it's not the same thing. We're saying that there is a standard above natural that makes something beautiful. So if we have a look at a nice scenic setting where there's this sunset coming down and all that sort of thing, again, we're back to the feeling that it gives us. And that tells us what is beautiful in nature as a good sunset and all of that. But is that still wholly subjective of what we think about that? Or is there an objective standard of a good sunset in a nice scenic setting?
Yeah, exactly. So while science can give us these categories, it can't really give us the categories in the same way that Kendall Walton argues, which is kind of interesting. So we can then move on and say, well, there's another way to look at nature. And I can't for the life of me remember whose argument this is. It's a woman's argument. But it's basically the landscape. So if you focus on, like when you see a photographer put his hands together and he focuses on a scene, you see like a filmmaker do it. So that is basically called the landscape judgment, the portrait judgment, where you take a particular scene and frame and you kind of think of it in the same way that you would think of a piece of art that looks like that. So in, say, a landscape painting, you would judge it by how the greens look and, the clearness of the sky, things like that. So that's another way that you could judge nature and say, well, perhaps that's the kind of standard that we could use.
Yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're comparing it to still life. You've taken a picture of a scene, and then there you've got that clear thing of, oh yeah, this is a good bit of still life. Again, there are certain scenes that do seem, I guess, a bit surreal. Some photography, they can capture something at a certain angle that makes a really weird picture or really abstract picture. So again, you're going back into how you would judge the art sort of that way. So whilst there isn't a direct standard of beauty for nature, you can compare it to the art it looks most like, which in general would be still life.
Or cinematography. Something along those kind of lines. But again, does that really give us any categories that we could judge that nature by? Because it's not being created by anybody. It's just a scene that happens to be there. So if somebody says, well, I don't find that particular scene beautiful, you can't then turn and say, well, look at these brushstrokes, or look at the way the cinematographer uses the light to bounce off the ground to create a richer green. There's none of that. There is just, well, that's what nature looks like.
Yeah, it is what it is. One of those, the first rule of logic? Something is what it is. It can't be anything else.
Yeah, the law of identity.
Yeah, law of identity. That's the one. Yeah, there is no additional way to really describe it. All you can do is a comparative thing. So, yeah, there is no classification to or standard really within nature that you can compare it to. The best you can do is compare it to a standard of art that it is most related to, but even then, still not the same thing.
Exactly. Sorry, I'm just reading up on something.
Okay. What would you like me to do in the meantime?
I'm just looking at Carroll's argument, which is something akin to Carlson's argument, and it's akin to the portrait mode. So when we look at a waterfall, we can judge its beauty by, say, how much force is going into it. Well, look at how forceful it is. Look at how much water is dropping down and the cutting of the rocks and that kind of thing. That's what makes it beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But again, does it actually make it beautiful?
Yeah, I'm still at the point where I don't think there is an objective standard for nature in the same way that we can do it with art. Um, I think that we could use certain classifications, as I mentioned earlier, for example, like countryside. And if the countryside suddenly became a really urban, built up, polluted area, we could say, well, that's not good as countryside, but that's still not telling us whether it's beautiful or not. It's just saying it doesn't really fit the classification of what countryside is. Um,
And you could judge all those kind of city things by architecture or
mm,
layout or planning. So there are objective standards to judge an urban landscape or a suburban landscape.
yeah, for example, you've got a Gothic style in a church sort of thing. You can actually, whether you like how churches look or not, you can compare it to this particular standard, this particular era. Yes, it ticks all the boxes for that era, but I don't. So actually, it's easier to judge unnatural things than natural. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Ah, bastard humans.
We're the ones with all the skill, not nature. And you see that's joking aside, but that is one of the things that can be used to classify something as beautiful, the skill that has gone into creating that piece of work.
Mm.
But nothing can be said like that about nature because there is no skill, there is no artist behind how it looks.
No, you
So
can appreciate the process of evolution and how we've got all this diverse life and all of that, but you wouldn't necessarily say the process of evolution was beautiful because it fucks up so many times. So, unless evolution was absolutely perfect, I mean, if we could imagine that, then I guess we could say maybe that would be beautiful. We can say certain products of it are beautiful, but again, we're comparing that on a subjective preference rather than an objective standard of it. We could talk about the functionality of, say, a hawk and its ability to see things miles away and swoop in and, catch that mouse that it was 300 feet away or whatever. But again, would we say that was beautiful?
That's it. If somebody turned to you and said, well, I don't find that beautiful, I just find that cruel.
Mm.
Can you turn around and say, well, no, it's beautiful because in the same way that you can a painting or a bit of architecture or a bit of music, anything like that, you can't really do that. So there are categories we can use to make judgments about nature, but I wouldn't necessarily argue that these are the same kind of objective categories and standards that we can use in something man-made.
Mm. Opie just chimed in. He says, people don't always consider standards for disgust or grotesque in aesthetics. So I suppose the one that jumps to my mind there is a gore film or a horror film. You would say that the fact that it's making you go is what it's intended to do. So you could judge in that category, it is good at what it's doing. So it is the beauty standard of this particular piece. But how else could we apply that to aesthetics?
Well, if you think of something like The Thing, the 1983 film, 81 film.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, I really like that. I even liked the new one as well.
Yeah, it was pretty good. But if you think about that 1981 film, there are a lot of pretty gross parts in it. But if you think of the skill that went into those special effects and how real they looked and how unique they were, you could turn around and say, well, I don't find them beautiful. And it's like, you could turn around and say, well, that's because you're not appreciating the art. It might be gross, but it's art.
Yeah, it's done its job. It's ticked the boxes.
Exactly. It's achieved its purpose. Think of something like a painting. When a painter creates a painting and he creates it to get a particular reaction, have you heard of the artist Damien Hirst?
I have actually, but I don't know why.
The chopped in half a cow guy.
Okay, yeah, that's why I know.
Yeah.
He was in the news a while ago.
Yeah, he created that piece of art to get a disgusting reaction. He wanted people to feel disgust at it, and he wanted people to be angry and say, that's not art. But if a part of art is creating some kind of feeling in the viewer and creating a particular feeling, then it has done its job, even if it's gross. And even if somebody misinterprets it and says, oh, that's disgusting, it's not art, it just makes me feel bad. Well, sometimes art is designed to make you feel bad or disgusted. Oliver Twist is art, and it was created in its time to make you feel disgust at the living standards that some people in poverty were going through.
And hopefully, with that feeling of disgust, build a appreciation for, well, maybe we should do something about it so that we don't feel disgusted about it. Although I imagine the average person just goes, I'm just going to ignore it.
Yeah. But art can be motivating, you know.
Definitely.
So there's a lot of ways to look at art, and this is another case of objective and subjective. If you look at a piece of art and you see something other than the artist's original intent, you have taken a new meaning from it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the artist's meaning is lost. It's just that you haven't seen it. So there's that kind of objective standard to judge it by as well.
No, that's interesting. It's going me back to when we used to do in English literature, and you're judging various poems and things like that, and the assonance and alliteration, and the way that it's all going through. We did a lot of Wilfred Owen, his war poems and things like that.
Yeah.
I think that's quite common in British schooling. But yeah, there's all those things that you're judging it against, and there's this thing. And sometimes, though, you might come up with something saying that this made me feel this way, and you put all of that in and you explain it, and it's not considered wrong because you're allowed to have that subjective interpretation as well, as long as you're picking up the key things that they want you to pick up from it as well. Exactly. Certain, repetition sounds going like da, 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 da. That's sort of bringing in the sound of machine gun fire whilst they're in the foxholes and all that sort of thing. So again, that's another standard to compare something against. And you can say that even if you found the poem boring, you can still judge it on the standard. It's still given you that reaction. It's made you picture the field of where everything is happening. So again, it's done its job, and you might have found a slightly different meaning to it too that may not have been the author's intention in the first place. And then that's one of the hard things, though, I find with a lot of art, especially the further you go back. No one really knows the intention of the artist or what they were trying to achieve with it. And so you end up with people arguing over it, and you're just like, oh, yeah. Well, who's right there? Nobody knows. Someone probably is, but we don't really know who.
Well, I got into arguments with my English teacher when I was in school because I found William Shakespeare to be incredibly great black comedy. And he said, no, you're missing the point. It's like, well, I might be, but it's still incredibly great black comedy. I mean, look at the ending of Romeo and Juliet. If that's not black comedy, I don't know what is.
Well, yeah, there's all right. There's always comedy in tragedy, they say anyway. So I think that's one of the things that came up when we were doing a little bit of Shakespeare at school, is the fact that there is that dark comedy in there. So I guess maybe it was you, Dave, you changed the minds, and that idea seeped out. And by the time I was studying it, they were like, oh, yes, black comedy, yes.
I doubt that. I think there's been people interpreting it as comedy for hundreds of years.
I'm sure there has as well. But, it's nice to big you up occasionally.
I'm already big. Look at my gut. And my huge brain. It's like pushing my hair apart.
So with nature, there isn't really an objective standard. We can talk about the functionality and we can compare, how good something is at killing, or something like that. We could compare it to art it most resembles. For most scenes, you'd probably go with something like still life. So you can compare it to that standard, but there still isn't an objective standard for nature.
No. Although there's one more thing that could be thrown in here that most atheists won't like, and that's, what if it was created by a god? Would him being the creator give it that added intentionality that we can judge something as beautiful from? So has he created the beauty of the sunset to offset the horribleness of a bug laying eggs in a child's eyes?
It's really hard not to switch this into a moral argument.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's the moral argument as well. If he's designed it to give a certain feeling, and somebody doesn't get that certain feeling, are they judging it wrong because they're just judging it as a wholly natural process rather than a process that's been created by some being with ultimate power?
Yeah. I suppose you could say that if there is that intentionality there, then yeah, we go back to it being like we're talking about our structures. You might not like a Gothic style, but actually you can judge it as a Gothic style. So the only problem there is we don't know if, just presupposing for a moment that there was a god, we don't know what his standard actually is. We don't know what his standard
What
of
his
each is.
intentions are,
No.
or how he created it. And if he's all powerful, well, then it doesn't really take much skill to create it.
That's it.
Yeah.
So we can't appreciate the skill there, because it just happened. So again, it wouldn't be the same as a human, because we're completely fallible and it takes us a lot of time to practice and get ourselves up there. If you're an all-powerful, all-knowing deity and you go, and it's done. So we can't judge it on the skill that went into it.
And he doesn't even have to think about it. He just has to go create a universe that will make humans that feel sublime feelings at a sunset.
Mm.
And he can't even get it wrong. So does that yeah. Would that actually give us a standard to judge nature by? As far as I'm concerned, I would say no.
No, unless we were to go with a different kind of god, not the omni god, but if we were to think about it, simulated universe style, a programmer who put it in and programmed our universe. Now, that might not actually be the way it is, but say that there was someone that actually had to consciously think about it. They're not perfect. They have a lot more power than us, but they did design each piece, and maybe all the dead planets were all the fuck ups, and that's why there's only one in our solar system that's got life on it, etc.
Well, it would be a digital sculpture instead of visual painting or, an actual physical marble sculpture. It would be of the same kind of thing, but digital.
Yeah.
And we appreciate the beauty that goes into a video game.
So, yeah, or some decent CG.
Yeah. So wouldn't that be a similar kind of standard if it was created by a programmer? We could appreciate that skill and what it creates to take a bit of code and make it self-aware.
Yeah. So that's just it. So if we basically reduce a deity to a more powerful type human type thing, then we could say, well, actually, yeah, there probably was skill. There's look at around us. There's the trial and error. We can judge it against those sort of standards. So yeah, no, that's quite good actually. There is another thing that I think we maybe missed out of nature as well, and it's sort of all the patterns that you see in nature, and all this, and all the spirals and all that sort of thing. From that perspective, we could have a standard sort of against comparing it to patterns, but then there you go, we're comparing it to something else that we've created ourselves, aren't we? Though we're
Yeah.
pattern recognition machines, so uh
Well, it's an interesting one, that actually, because it sort of goes back to the God. Imagine like the different type of God. Go with something like the philosopher's God, which is the God of mathematics. The mathematics that exists in the universe is kind of beautiful if you really want to think about it. The fact that it can be modeled, the fact that we can actually understand that it can be modeled is sort of a beautiful thing. But if somebody doesn't find it beautiful because they don't appreciate math and they say, well, I don't find it beautiful, can you really say, well, you're judging it wrong?
nope.
Yeah.
I wanted to think of a yes there, but I couldn't.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it is beautiful, at least to me. It's an amazing thing. And the universe contains self-aware beings that have arisen out of nothing, basically. Um, Life has emerged from what is essentially non-life. To me, that's kind of a beautiful thing. And it's a category that we can judge it by, but I'm not really sure I could say it's an objective standard that we could judge it by.
No, I'm with you. I agree. So I think that's sort of got us to the point where there isn't really an objective standard that we can compare nature to. The closest we have is comparing it to other things that are similar that we've created ourselves, or as you mentioned with the mathematics. But again,
Yeah, that's it. You can say somebody's judging a piece of art wrong because they literally would be judging it incorrectly. Okay, they might not find it beautiful. And even if they knew how to judge it, they might not actually find that beautiful, but they could at least appreciate that it is a good piece of artwork. But like you say, there is no such thing in nature because it's missing some of the vital components, like it doesn't have a creator. It's not been designed a particular way. There is no intention to how it looks. It just looks that way. Whereas with art, it's intended to look that way.
Yeah. So
It's a complicated one. This is why I love aesthetics.
yeah,
A lot of people don't appreciate it, but it's actually quite a rich subject.
definitely. It's I've enjoyed the like when we were talking about the rationality of emotions the other week. Oh, hey LB, how you doing?
Hey, LB.
Nice to see you. Yeah, LB's currently having a break from the internet, or at least social media and YouTube. So he's just popped in to say hello. Yeah, I don't blame him either, especially the conversations we've had over the last couple of days, which is quite funny actually, because Leon yesterday was like, how often do you get into these sorts of conversations? And we'd both gone, oh no, not often really. It's I used to get into them quite a bit, but I try and avoid that sort of conversation. Then we've had a 2-day conversation about it.
Yeah, they're all on mute now anyway, so.
Yeah. I've definitely lost my train of thought. I'm blaming you, LB. It's not the fact that I'm incredibly scatty at all.
No.
So, yeah, with nature, it's hard to find that objective standard. And we were talking about aesthetics and why it's interesting, and there are so many different things to look at, and in certain areas, you can describe things in a different way, and it's looking things onto the different parameters around it. So with art, there are clear objective standards that you can compare it to, whether you're talking about movies or paintings or drawings or sculptures or whatever. You have a standard that you can compare it to, so you can say, I don't find this beautiful personally, but then you can also compare it to that standard. And I think most people don't actually think about standards. especially as Opie said earlier, disgust and grotesque standards, like we addressed with a snuff film, or anything like that. There are certain things that you can say, I make you feel disgust, but that's their intention. So from that regard, they're giving you that feeling. They're fulfilling their purpose. And I think that is the intriguing thing, and I think that is the thing that most people don't think about, like at the objective standards. Now, when we think about this, there are actually objective standards of beauty for people in different countries. There are expected ways that we have to look. I don't know if you've seen them, but there are some where they've got the same woman where the artist has basically used Photoshop and done the makeup and things like that.
The hips a little, and slightly broader shoulders.
Yeah, some of them where they have to have a face covering or a head covering, or whether they've got certain types of earrings in, and whether the lipstick's really bright or whether it's all like natural look. And so there are actually objective standards of human beauty that I suppose they're not as rigorous as say a standard of art. And I think that no one would outright say, no, this is what men are supposed to look like, this is what women are supposed to look like. Well, actually some people do, but you know what I mean. There wouldn't be like we have with art, with abstract art or still life or surrealism or anything like that. We wouldn't have someone say, no, this is the way you look. I know magazines and things like that are constantly doing that sort of thing, and people are trying to fill these impossible goals because they've been airbrushed to shit and they don't actually look like that in real life. On that note, I've seen that Instagram influencers have been banned from using filters on their photos when they are promoting products, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
That's a great idea, yeah.
Yeah, because they're
essentially false advertising.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I tried this and I look beautiful. No, that filter. The filter on you is beautiful. And I tell you what, the photo apps these days, I mean, I was using FaceApp the other day, and you know what? I turned myself into a really beautiful woman.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that one. There's, I don't know if you know much about China, but in China, they have kind of webcam girl services. It's not like in the UK or anything where it's women getting naked, you pay them money, they go topless. It's basically just women who sit on the end of a webcam and guys come in and chat to them and throw money at them because they find them beautiful and all that kind of thing. And a lot of them use filters just to add that little bit more. And there was one recently who she would always say, well, I'll give you a real face reveal if you can reach this amount of money. And she would always set it incredibly high, so that people would throw that money at her, but it was impossible to reach the goal in that set of time. And at one point, they actually did manage to do it.
All right.
So she had to do the face reveal. And it turned out she wasn't the 30-year-old woman. She was like 55 and dumpy, and and she was nothing like she looked on cam because she was using an app to give her this standard, the cultural standard that most people go for.
Yeah, again, false advertising. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, over here, not necessarily every cam girl is doing the softcore, hardcore porn thing. Some of them are doing the same sort of thing. They'll be on Twitch or anything like that. They will be incredibly attractive, but they'll be more the gamer girl sort, and they're just answering questions. They're not doing any porn. They might do risque poses and photos, but you tend not to see them naked or anything.
Yeah,
like
what's
that.
her name? Pokimane?
I don't know that one. Sorry.
Yeah, she's one of the. I see her name mentioned on YouTube a lot, was causing drama and that kind of thing. But yeah, they're basically Twitch streamer girls over there, but they're not playing a game. They're just sat there chatting and making people feel good.
I did
Like,
hear about one the other day though that was actually really pissing off streamers because they used a sprite and they actually used an anime sprite as their avatar, so their actions were there, but it was just an anime sprite. And that particular person was overtaking all of these, women who had been trying to make themselves look beautiful just for the sake of a sprite, which I thought was really interesting. And maybe we should do it. I mean, maybe you'd find me more attractive if I was an anime sprite, you know.
just turned me into Pikachu. I'm already about the right shape.
We got a question from LB as well. He says, has to do with philosophy and science. Is metaphysics just speculative or not? And he heard science can overlap with it. That's an interesting question. What do you mean by overlap in that sense? Because if something's metaphysical, science is about testing the physical. So I don't see how that there's necessarily that. You could have a metaphysical claim and try and think of a method to find the link between the metaphysical and the physical, I guess. But I'm not exactly sure. What do you think, Dave?
I think, yes, they can overlap. Metaphysics can shape science in the sense of, say, think of Popper's falsification.
Mm-hmm.
That's a metaphysical theory that shapes the science and how we investigate the physical. And if you think about something like the problem of mind, there are metaphysical applications to the philosophy of mind, but they should be shaped by the science, because think of something like free will. Free will is a metaphysical thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's discussed in a metaphysical way, but the more we learn about neurology, the more our account of free will should be shaped by the science.
Yeah, and determinism as well. That makes sense. So yeah, there is an overlap. They do potentially influence each other, but maybe not quite. Science could study metaphysics someday. Yeah,
depends. I'm not sure.
I've got a metaphysical microscope right here.
Yeah, that's the thing. Metaphysical is properties over and above the actual physical workings. So ethics would be morality would be a metaphysical property, but we could use the science of psychology to shape ethics.
Yeah. Like when we're talking about abuse, and there's been plenty of studies on the effects of abuse, and how there's damage to the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of that person, cause ongoing suffering for them, and not just them, for their family and friends and everyone they might interact with after that sort of thing happens, which then feeds back into ethics as well. So you do have that almost feedback loop of things. We wouldn't necessarily be able to go, right, actually, well, not ethically anyway, create a society and put them in different boxes and say, right, we're going to try this form of ethics in this one. This one's going to be purely consequentialist utilitarianism. This one's going to be brought up on Kantian ethics, and this one's going to be virtue-based. And let's find out what works best. I mean, we'd probably say that was quite unethical in the same way that you would with the Truman Show.
Yeah. I mean, there are philosophers that also reject the metaphysical completely. I think Patricia Churchland is one. Her husband is another one, and I can't remember his name. But AiR, and I think Wittgenstein at one point rejected metaphysics completely. I can't remember exactly, though.
Blimey, I mean, that's a large chunk of philosophy to just go, no, to.
Well, they say it should be grounded in the physical. If any statement is made and it can't be verified, think of something like a positivist or a verificationist. If it can't be verified, then it can't be considered a proposition.
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a lot of problems with positivism and verificationism, as we highlighted when we did our knowledge and certainty video. If you're interested in that one, that's in the playlist called Fresh Air. It's part of a 2-part series. The first one on beliefs and logic, and the second on knowledge and certainty. That's interesting. So, but then.
Well, I mean,
Couldn't we say the theories of knowledge aren't exactly physical either?
they're metaphysical, yeah.
So
Yeah,
that gets really confusing.
it does. I mean, if you think as well, some people think of the term metaphysical as dealing with something like God only. Things that exist that are immaterial and out of reach and all speculative. And that can be considered, I mean, God could be considered a metaphysical idea, but not all metaphysical ideas are ideas like God.
No. And I think some of them we can actively see the impact a hell of a lot more. So would they have rejected, ethics completely, or would they have taken a more
they take a more science-based approach,
like we were discussing the studies on abuse and things like that? We can see the impact that this has and causes suffering, therefore we would regard that as unethical,
it's psychologically driven. It's part of our neurology, so they would consider it more sort of like an emotive response, and that emotive response is created by our psychology, and it's rooted in the physical. If you're going for a metaphysical explanation, well, it can't be tested. It's essentially just speculation.
Does
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So LB, basically, there are other ways to study and falsify things like morality, mathematics, free will, language, God, no God, etc. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of ways you can look at things. There are a lot of things that can't easily be tested, or at least can't be tested ethically. I gave away that we could actually test all ethical theories, but it would be a Truman Show style thing, but on whole societies. Actually, there was that movie where there were different cities, weren't they? And they'd all been told that they were the last people in the world surviving, and they all had different rules and things like that. I'm trying to remember what it was called. I think I even started reading the books, and like the first book was really interesting, and then they just petered off after that. And then I watched the movie, and I don't know if I've seen any of the others. But there was the guy in it called Four, and they were all given certain qualities. So certain people would be those that would always tell the truth. Candor, the House of Candor, I believe. And then there were the intellectual house, and there were the gardening house, and all that. And basically, what happens is at the end of it, they sort of overrun everything, and they go and they see that actually, if they travel far enough, there are loads of these cities. But that's as far as I've got with the story.
Not heard of that one.
No, it was an interesting concept, but I think poorly executed. So, but that in itself, we would, especially when you become aware that that's been happening to you, you're like, what the fuck? We've been lied to our entire lives, and I don't think there is a way that we can ethically test ethics on a grand scale like that. All we can do is try and do what we've done, like studies on abuse, and see if we can compare it to human flourishing and things like that. And you can still make objective statements about what benefits the species as a whole and things like that, but you can't test it in the same way as a scientific test, because it wouldn't be ethical to do so in itself. Again, free will. Dave mentioned free will earlier. but he spoke about how the more we understand about neurology, the more that should shape our understanding of free will. So there's that symbiotic thing there. Oops, sorry, between science and metaphysics. Language is an odd one. Yeah, linguistics. I've had too many conversations about semantics recently that I don't even want to address this one right now.
They're boring conversations for the most part.
And God, no God. Yeah, so obviously God is a metaphysical claim. So it's one of the things that when fellow atheists say they want, verifiable evidence of God, don't get me wrong, I want that too. But I also understand that as a metaphysical thing, there probably isn't a physical thing. The most you can do is look for effects that could only be explained by a God. But just because they're not there doesn't mean that there's not a God, so that becomes that it's really, really, really hard to test a God in that regard. The only thing you can really do is take a particular God claim and look for logical inconsistencies, and that's one of the biggest problems with the omnigod, as written in the Bible. That doesn't mean that it's not based on a deity. Of course, it could be. There could be some truth to it, but the way it's been written and the way a lot of Christians will describe their God is actually quite logically inconsistent and incoherent, and they don't even realize it. And again, you can get into a frustrating conversation if you go down that path. And to be honest, I'm not really interested in having that conversation anymore. You believe in God? Cool. Are you a decent person? All right, I don't care. Oh, you're using your God to justify being a bigot? Well, fuck you. Let's tear apart your God and you whilst I'm at it. That's the way I'd sort of approach that situation. I don't care if someone believes in God or not, or if someone's on the fence, or if they operate some different position. No real concern of mine, as long as they are a decent person and they're not using their deity to justify negative behaviors. So
you can use reason and logic and rationality to justify asshole behavior as well.
You can. Yeah, I mean, someone even tried to do that to justify slavery. Well, it benefits the people that own the slave, so therefore it's moral. And you're like,
bye.
Yeah, again, you're not looking at the whole picture. You're not actually considering the infraction on human rights and all of that. Okay.
Yeah. Most people look at things through what could be generally considered a sort of selfish perspective. Like, consider, going back to the subject tonight, consider beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is always subjective. What I determine to be beautiful is what's beautiful. At least for me, I can't be wrong about what's beautiful. But when you actually look into it, if you think about it, there are standards of judgment, like Kendall Walton says. But they generally only look at it through how they view the world.
And you get the same arguments coming off of things like morality as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But, yeah. I don't need to bring that one up again as well. I'm sure I've had enough rants about that one whilst we've been on air too. So LB says he's going to see us all on the 18th of February on Twitter and here on YouTube. Oh, that's really good.
Nice one.
18th of February. That is a Friday, isn't it? Or is it a Thursday? If it's a Thursday, we'll definitely see you. If not, we'll just have to see you on Twitter. We tend not to stream on Fridays.
Yeah, it's a few days after my first test in the new degree.
Ooh.
Yeah.
2 days after my birthday as well.
Nice one.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to, go on Patreon and sign up, as a birthday present, that'd be lovely.
LB will come on camera and do a striptease for you.
Oh, I like that. And Opie can do the mix and LB will do the strip.
Sounds pretty good.
Excellent. We've got our stream for 16th of February sorted.
He's never going to watch this again, is he?
So he says, trust me, I understand. The issue is with some atheists that since the claims and actions of God are of revealed religions make, they adapt a very empiricist view, where nothing else matters but science. Yeah, I mean, I can understand they basically reject the metaphysical, like Dave was talking about those philosophers that were rejecting the metaphysical. And I can sort of understand doing that. At least saving yourself from things that you're probably not going to get an answer on, especially with things like God. But then don't spend your time conversing about God if you're not going to talk about it on the level that we're talking about God. In fact, that's like the beauty thing, you know. If we're discussing a piece of abstract art and you're not judging it as a piece of abstract art, you're judging it as still life, and you say, I don't like it, it's not a really good tree, as you said earlier, then you're judging it wrong. And it's the same thing when you're talking about a metaphysical claim. If you're only judging it in physicalist terms, well, again, you're going to talk past each other and not, get to well, you're not going to progress in your conversation. You're just going to talk past each other. No, I want physical evidence. I want physical evidence. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we were talking about more of a physical deity, say if we were still in the time when people like the gods were considered more superhumans, like the Greek pantheon or the Norse gods or anything like that, well, then you should be able to actually see them because people will have interacted with them and they know where they're going to be, and then all of a sudden you could search everywhere and they'd never be there. And at least you could then say there is a bit more of a physical thing to hold on there. But when you're talking about gods in general, you are talking about a metaphysical claim, so there is no point in judging it to a standard that it shouldn't be judged by. I'm surprised I managed to get that to link back into tonight's topic.
Well, that's why we call them category errors. And basically, if you're judging a piece of art, a piece of abstract art as an animation cell, you're committing a category error.
That's one that I also hear people throw around, committing a category error when you're not.
Just say why.
Yeah.
Why? What categories am I mixing up? What are the categories?
Yeah.
Most of them won't know. Like that Randolph guy, he just threw out, you're making this fallacy. I mean, he accused me of committing the black and white fallacy because I said a proposition can only have a true or false value.
Yeah, which is true. If you're talking about a general proposition, it is something that is true. Like a light switch, it's on or off. Existence exists or it doesn't exist. Rain, it's either raining or not raining. Now, there are other options after that when we're talking about weather, because there are other types of weather. But the proposition itself is whether it is raining or not. We can then go, okay, well, if it's not raining, what is it doing? It is sunny. And again, it is sunny or not. It is snowy or not. All of these propositions are true, false things. Your attitude towards them isn't as binary as that, because you're supposed to be looking at your opinion on the truth of it and your opinion on the falseness to it. So you could actually be in the middle and not think it true or false, and actually be in the middle in that sort of psychological state of agnosticism. But
if there's only two options, you're not committing the black and white fallacy.
No. Would you like chicken or beef tonight? And that's a dichotomy. Yes, there are other types of food, but the choice I'm giving you is between two things. Again, that's not a black and white thing. In this restaurant, we only serve chicken and beef. That's all you can have. So that is what it is. It doesn't matter that there's food out there that is different. And yeah.
Yeah. Atheists need to stop. They need to start learning to stop throwing out fallacy names, thinking that some kind of defeater, and maybe even look into what these fallacies actually are that they're throwing around.
Yeah. And I mean, not all of them are formal. And some of them can be quite confusing and a little bit harder to describe than others as well. I mean, we even had some fun making up our own ones, didn't we, Dave, a little while ago? Uh, because again, they're informal fallacies that make sense. A lot of fallacies come under bigger headings of like a big category of fallacy. Um, so, like a genetic fallacy, you could almost have like a poisoning well is a type of genetic fallacy, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so that there are. It is one of those things we find we actually end up having more disagreements with fellow atheists on these fallacies and things like that because so many of us seem to play fallacy bingo, and they don't agree with you, so they go, you're committing a straw man. It's like, no, you literally just said this. I'm asking, is that what you think? That is not committing a straw man. You said it, and I was like, I'm clarifying. Are you sure that this? So that one happened yesterday. Someone said the broadest definition is the best. So does that apply to everything, or only the thing you're talking about? And it's like, that's not my argument. Okay, well, it is an either or. So are you doing? No, you're straw manning me. You just said, screenshot, that the broadest definition is the best. So either you're just applying that to the definition you're using, so it was for atheists rather than theists. But if you're holding yourself to a different standard to theists, then that is special pleading. Or it applies to everything, and then we end up with contradictions where the positions meet in the middle, because the broad definitions of a theist and an atheist, where you're only describing them on what they lack belief in, will meet in the middle, where you would normatively have an agnostic, and then you end up with an atheistic theist or a theistic atheist, and that's a bit of a contradiction in itself. And not my argument, you're straw manning me.
Yeah, I also liked his finale to it, whereas I'm not giving you an argument, I'm giving you an opinion, but you're strawmanning me. Well, if you're not making an argument, you can't be strawmanned. Because the strawman fallacy is to attack an argument.
Just not the argument that they're making, a weaker version of their argument, so that in some instances it could even slide under the radar of that's not exactly what they were saying, and onlookers might think, oh, okay, yeah, that is, yeah, he's defeated him because they haven't thought about it as well. But that is what a straw man is, you know. But step one, someone makes an argument. Step two, the person going against them counters it by arguing against something that they didn't exactly say. Sometimes it's really obvious because it's just, well, I didn't say that at all. But that, yeah, clarifying on what someone is saying is not a straw man. Going, do you really mean this? Are you sure that you should do this? Don't strawman me. Well, I'm asking if that's what you mean, so I'm not strawmanning you. Do you mean this? You're strawmanning my position. Okay, tell me what your position is. And then they repeat what they just said, and you're just
I think it's because a lot of them are just repeating stuff that they've heard.
Yeah. Opie says fallacy of fallacies.
Yeah.
So, and LB is saying, this is why I strongly urge Christians and other theists to take on the classical theist, deist, pantheist position. It's so much better and makes a better case. I can't argue with that. Yeah, because in general they don't have a religious claim attached to them. Some do, but yeah, in general they don't. There are types of deists which sort of adhere to some doctrines of religion, but not as strictly. That's sort of an adaptive form of deist rather than a pure deist. But again, I guess when some people become a deist, they've generally come from a religion, so they've got the influences of that religion coming through into their deism, and it can be hard to shake that off. But over time, I imagine they reason their way through that. Also, what you were both saying, and Opie did right here, fallacy fally. It's a real one as well, and plus, internet atheists get very trigger happy with fallacies. Yeah, they do. Like our fellow atheists, as I was saying, do play fallacy bingo. It's almost like they especially in a conversation where they disagree with the person. So it will largely you'll see it with fundamentalist Christians and Muslims a lot. Every step of the way, they just spend their time going fallacy, 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 rather than actually addressing the comments and explaining why that doesn't work. It's just like, yeah, you committed a fallacy, I'm just going to ignore you. But we find that they also do it to us because we're literally just explaining something and asking questions. And again, they play fallacy bingo with us. Oh, I don't agree with you, therefore you're straw manning me. Well, no, that's not what a straw man is. um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What I say is, if you can't explain what the fallacy is and explain why the argument contains that fallacy, stop calling it a fallacy.
and I think there's better ways to address fallacies than simply pointing out a fallacy.
Yeah, just point out the error in the argument.
Exactly, and just even if you do it, can you explain this to me? Because it seems like this bit would contradict that bit, or it doesn't make sense with this. Maybe it's my understanding. Can you explain it to me? All of a sudden, you've broken down the barrier because you're saying, I want you to explain this to me. Now, if someone then does keep going on and on and on with the same thing, fine. If you want to, fallacy, mute, move on. But have a conversation first. Don't play fallacy bingo. I don't understand why this is such a popular thing to do, especially when so many get the fallacies wrong. They don't understand them.
So as Randolph proved the last couple of days, there are some people you just can't have a discussion with.
No, definitely not. So that's the president of the Canadian Atheist Club or whatever. Yeah, that's it's not actually got club at the end, but I put it in to make
Let's put it in.
And the director of American Atheists. So I've been blocked by both of them by trying to get them to explain the fallacies that they claim that I'm making and them being unable to explain them. And, trying to have a logical, rational discussion with them and them proving that they don't understand it. Oh, it really frustrated me when we were talking about epistemic justification.
I know what it is. I'm a free thinker. That means I don't have any epistemic justifications.
Like, what?
Epistemic responsibility.
Yeah.
I know what epistemic responsibility is, but I'm a free thinker, which means I have no epistemic responsibility for any of my positions.
Absolutely ridiculous. Because that's not how it works.
No.
But you try and explain it to them, and none of them listen.
That's why we're down to 99 viewers from 102.
Yeah, because a couple of them were clearly the people that we were having a discussion with, or they were being onlookers, and they were like, "Oh, you're not real atheists. You don't say atheism is a lack of belief, and you're saying that we have a burden of proof. We don't have no burden of proof." LB admits that he probably played a bit of fallacy bingo about 4 years ago. I think we've all gone through a bit of a phase. It's like I've admitted before, like especially with our discussions about discussions, and what I'm doing is pointing out a lot of things that I did in the past and realized were wrong and were preventing me from having good conversations with people. And what I want to do is have good conversations with people, but the heuristic nature of others I do find sometimes brings that out in me. When you're trying to have a calm conversation with someone who's just interested in a fight, eventually they can make you go into fight mode yourself, and that can be frustrating. And I'm guilty of that, and I think for me, those sorts of people I need to either mute or block so that I don't get caught up in that crap, because I don't like behaving that way, and I don't think it's good to present yourself that way. I don't think it has good conversations. I think that's why generally we have better discussions with theists and agnostics and other ontological positions other than the internet atheists. Even though we're atheists ourselves, we don't get on with them because they are very stuck in their tribe-like mentality and their dogma and things like that. And as much as you try and address it and you try and have a decent conversation, you find that they are still in that fight mentality, and they take it as, well, because you're not agreeing with whatever definition of atheism they use or morality or how their understanding of burden and proof, clearly you must be a theist. And so then they go into fight mode, and you see how they behave. And I really actually feel sorry for a lot of the theists who come under fire from this sort of behavior every day on the internet. You could argue that some of them perhaps ask for it, but I don't like victim blaming. And I don't think, and I think, we atheists are constantly claiming that we're more rational, more logical, smarter, more moral. Why don't we start acting that way? Why do we keep throwing out logic when it doesn't suit our position? Why do we act like complete dicks to people who don't agree with us and think that that's okay? If we're supposed to be smart and more rational and more logical, just why can't we be that way? What's stopping us?
Yeah, I just remembered one of Randolph's cell phones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said something like, for a group of people that think, where a lot of them think that they're rational and intellectual and all that, a lot of them don't act that way. And Randolph said, when have I ever claimed that I was rational, logical, or intellectual?
Well done. I'm glad
Yeah.
you realize that you are irrational and illogical, and therefore your sight of the official definition of atheism, which is absolute bollocks. We should do that. I would be interested. We spoke about doing it when I first saw it. I didn't even realize it was his site when I originally saw it. And I had a conversation with you about it. I had a conversation with Steve about it. I think Steve has actually done a stream on it.
I think he's done a stream, hasn't he?
Yeah. Maybe we don't need to recycle his work. We'll just watch it and.
Yeah, but we do it in a more jokey way.
All right. It gives us some additional content.
Yeah. And we can just wing that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No prep. Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's how I roll anyway.
Do that on one of the nights where I have a tutorial in the morning, a tutorial in the evening, and then I'm just jumping straight from the tutorial onto the stream. Because then I don't have to spend any of the day doing prep, and I can just get some relaxation between the tutorials.
Yeah, sounds good to me. We'll do that. And actually, speaking about future shows, so our schedule is a bit haywire at the moment. I know we usually do Tuesdays and Thursdays, but Dave's got a lot of tutorials coming on for his new course that he's doing. And some of them are in the evening.
A week. Yeah.
Some of them are in the evening. I think when I looked at next week, you're doing pretty much every evening as well, although a couple of them were recorded. But I don't know if you want to do either a later stream or try and get an earlier stream in the day, or just fit it around whatever. We'll see what we can do. But please be patient with us whilst our schedule is a little bit haywire at the moment. We will, settle back into a routine, perhaps a new routine, but we will get a routine again in the future. But
once I realize how many tutorials I actually need, I might be able to cut down on how many I have to actually attend.
Yeah, that's fair. So once we've reached a state of normality, then we will have more consistent streams again. But please just make sure that you subscribe to us on YouTube so you can stay up to date with any live shows that are coming. Obviously, follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. That will let you know when we're going live. And yeah, so we have a couple of ideas for our next show as well. So on Friday, I'm releasing an article which is trying to think about a slightly different way to speak about beliefs, a different way to explain them, because perhaps in the past, where we've been describing what a belief is and how propositional logic works, it's been a bit too technical for the average person who doesn't really get that sort of thing, and it can be a lot of hard work to get across. And I know that logical notation and things like that make it really easy to have a conversation on somewhere like Twitter because of the character limit, but again, it can get a bit confusing for people. So there is that article that we're doing, and we might do an article reading of that. We seem to have had a couple of good responses off of doing the article readings, so we might try that again. And we got a few other ideas in the works as well. And as Dave said, we might do a teardown of that one.
An evil stream.
And also, one thing that we do want to do is at the end of the month, we want to have a general chat. So we want to get a bunch of people into the stream with us. So we're gonna, if anyone's interested, we'll send you out a link to our Discord channel, and you can come join us. And generally, just whatever anyone wants to discuss, anything anyone wants to ask or anything like that, just come on. If you don't want your face to be there, that's fine. You don't have to turn your camera on or anything like that. We understand that you might want to keep things private. It's not a problem if we can't see your camera. At the end of the day, the important thing is the voice. So if you want to do that with us, let us know. We're going to try our first one, hopefully at the end of this month, as long as it doesn't clash with Dave's tutorials. If not, it'll either be the start or end of March that we'll be doing this. So that'll be a good one. We're also, OP suggested a topic as well that he would like to cover off, which was methodological naturalism.
Methodological.
Bit of a tongue twister, that one. My tongue's so big though, it doesn't even fit in my mouth at the best of times. So yes, tongue twisters really screw me up. But yeah, so that one's going to come out as well once we've had a bit of time to prepare for that one. Really looking forward to doing that one with you, OP. So thank you for agreeing to come on.
I'll learn a lot, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're going to let you lead that one if you hadn't realised from the conversation there. It's going to be the OP show. But yeah. So I think that really covers off what we were intended to discuss tonight and a bit more. We started on discussing about beauty, standards of beauty, how certain things don't have an objective standard, so it is basically purely subjective or a comparative objective, whereas others do have an objective standard, but that doesn't necessarily affect your subjective preference. Although if you're judging something as that when it should be that, you're obviously judging incorrectly. We moved on to metaphysical things, and again, there's a standard there that again you can compare things to wrong. Because if you're trying to think of a metaphysical claim in physical terms, in general, it won't work, especially if you're looking for a purely physical without the link in between. Obviously, over time, there might be ways to test for more of these metaphysical things, as Dave mentioned, with our understanding of neurology increasing, that shapes our understanding of free will. Also, the understanding of the cause and effect and determinism in the universe, that can also shape our understanding of free will. So there are so many things that cross over there that we can have an objective standard to compare against, and there are many things that there is no real standard other than our subjective preference. One last comment from LB before we sign off. He says, I will never understand why new atheists constantly have an irrational hatred of atheists who are more academically informed than their internet atheist counterpart like you guys. Well, it's because I think what it comes down to is they wear the badge of skeptic and the badge of rational, and they think being an atheist makes you a skeptic and makes you rational, and therefore if someone tells them that might not be the case, it's like, how dare you, I am a king atheist and I am super smart and rational. You're like, well, I'm an atheist too, so can we just have a conversation rather than going on this? I've been wrong about things in the past. I'm sure you've been wrong too, haven't you? Yes, but I'm not wrong about this. Okay, well, how do you know? Because I'm not.
I've never been wrong about anything. Masters with distinction. No, I've been wrong about lots of things.
Yeah, so I think that's why they do have a bit of an irrational hatred for us, because it's tribalism again. They see us as someone who is not part of the tribe, even though if you think about the ontological positions many internet atheists hold, they're actually more like agnostics than what would be the philosophical use of an atheist. So whilst we would fit atheists under both definitions, they only fit it under one. But you try and explain logic. Well, I'm logical, so I don't need to know because everything I do is logical. Try and explain rationality. You try and explain epistemic justification. They don't want to know. They just want to be right in their position. And by right, I don't mean that they're correct objectively. I'm talking about they're subjectively correct. Like Duke and always going on about his objective facts, which are neither objective nor facts.
Yeah, ego can play a big part.
Yeah.
Like if you think you're the smartest one in the room and someone comes along who's better informed than you, then you have to kind of scare them away or shoot them down or put them down or make people think, oh, he might sound informed. He doesn't really know what he's talking about. I'm still the smartest one in the room. Send me Patreon money. Donate to my Canadian Atheist Association.
I mean, you can see the same sort of behavior happening in different denominations of Christianity and stuff like that, and other sorts of theists. They, well, you're no real Christian because you take a liberal view on homosexuality, and you love them when it says that we should stone them. So therefore, and they'll argue against each other that way. And I think that sort of comes down to the attitude of it. Like, you've got your fire and brimstone style people, and you've got your more relaxed, easygoing, trying to think about things in a rational, logical way style people on both sides. And that's where I think you get your more like liberal Christians. They look at the positive aspects. They have an almost virtuous idea of Jesus. That is their Superman that they're trying to be. Whereas the more conservative ones are more, deontologists, that these are the rules in the book, it says this, it's literally true, there you go. And so they'll have those arguments between them as well. And that's where you come off with all those. So it's not just new atheists and atheists like us, although technically we are considered new atheists because we will speak out against theists as well. That's technically all new atheism is supposed to be. A better classification would be good new atheists and bad new atheists. Maybe mediocre ones. No, we're about the mediocre level. We're just not as bad as them lot.
Yeah. It's a difficult one.
It is.
I mean, we do speak out, but there are more interesting conversations like tonight's conversation. It's a more interesting conversation than going over the same old kind of God arguments and stuff like that. There are loads of channels that do that. You want that kind of stuff? Go watch somebody like Real Atheology. Yeah. Far more informed than us, better at the arguments than us. We like to delve into more different wide variety of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he specializes in the philosophy of religion, and as you say, he's amazing at it. And the way he conducts himself is amazing. So the conversations he gets into with theists, that's the way the new atheist should do it. If you're actually interested, if you want an objective standard of how to have a religious discussion as an atheist with theists, check out Real Atheology, because bloody amazing. Do not compare yourself to the way you see a lot of atheists on the internet, especially on Twitter, and debate groups on Facebook and things like that behaving. No, that is not the way to do it. And even people like Ra and stuff like that, no, that is not the way to do it. Real Atheology, that should be your objective standard to compare yourself against about getting in conversations about religion. Do it. Check them out. They are amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it. We've covered off beauty in quite detail and how there can be objective beauty, although there is always subjective beauty, and sometimes there isn't an objective standard. We discussed metaphysics, and I had a couple of rants as well. which I love.
Same.
And I got to point you in the direction of a decent objective standard to compare yourself against as an atheist. Once again, check out Real Atheology. Anyway, I think that's us for the night. Thank you everyone who has checked us out, who's watched the videos live, interacted in the chat, and who is catching the rerun. All of you are absolutely awesome. Thank you very much. You have been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
Good night all.
Good night all.
And as I mentioned, we do usually broadcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. GMT, but for now, our schedule's a bit haywire. So make sure you do like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with all the notifications.
Yeah.